to our interpretation of the Bible that we are conscious of the historical circumstances, the general historical background of our text, and that means we must be conscious of the general chronological period that we're dealing with. And but the issue is, yes, chronological periods, but not that area of itself, because really time itself really doesn't mean much. Yeah. What makes time meaningful in this perspective, or in this respect, is what is it that you associate the time with. So, like we said, if you're dealing with the period of the judges, what makes that season or epoch significant is what is going on there. What is going on there is the generation of leaders who took the people out of Israel are gone. We don't have yet a new set of unifying leaders. And the nation has to rely on God raising deliverers from time to time in this place, sometimes in the other place. And the absence of leadership then precipitates chaos, disorder, sin, judgment. Yeah. So we're looking at that time, not so much in terms of 1030 BC to 930 BC. Those dates really mean not much. It is what is going on at that time that makes our interpretation much more meaningful. So I'm saying that to make this point, that as you think about these stages of the development of history, what is of hermeneutical significance to you is, I think, two other questions. And the first question is, during this time, what are the, what you might call the socio, political, even economic circumstances of the people? Okay? What are the social, economic, or even political circumstances of the people? Now, let me give an example here. Think of the ministry of a prophet like Daniel. Okay, think of the ministry of a prophet like Daniel. And then think of the ministry of a prophet like Elijah. So someone tell me, what is the radical difference between these two ministries that you can think of? The circumstances of the ministry of Elijah, for example? No. Let me take Isaiah. Yeah? Isaiah and Daniel. What's the difference? If you take into account the times in which they live. Now consider this, that probably Isaiah lives in the middle of the 8th century, so 750 thereabouts. And then Daniel comes to live somewhere, sometime after 586. Yeah? Now I've just mentioned times, which really means nothing. So let's put some meaning to those times. So what's the difference there, you think? If you consider what's going on around those times. What is the condition of the people of God around 750 BC? What is the circumstances of the people of God around about, say, 560, 550 BC? What's the difference there? Yeah.
Isaiah lives during a time when God's people have abandoned him,
Mm-hmm.
making treaties with foreign nations,
Yeah.
and he is trying to warn them of the coming judgment,
Yes.
exile to be precise. But then Daniel comes almost close to the time before they go to exile as a young one, very young.
Yeah, as a young man, yes.
And then most of his period is in Babylon now.
Yes.
So he brings hope. He's giving hope to the Israelites while in Babylon now.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think you said more than I expected, which is good. Because that anticipates the second thing I was going to say. But the point is this, if you look at just the circumstances of those people in terms of their social, political, and economic circumstances, socially, politically, even economically, in the days of Isaiah, the nation is still intact. Okay? Of course they are sinning, but they are still in their land. They're not being ruled by other nations. So their political circumstances is that they are a free sovereign nation, right? Yeah, they're a free sovereign nation. That is why they're able to make treaties with other nations. Of course, they do that out of fear and so on. But they have decision-making powers. There is relative economic well-being. These treaties are now making it possible for them to make money and stuff. They feel relatively safe. Yeah. Now, socially, there is a lot of wrongs going on. Yeah, the oppression of the poor. Yeah. Kings who just go haywire. Yeah. So, even though the nation should be doing well, but that well-doing is not spread across the border. Yeah. But by and large, they are still a free, sovereign nation. And so Isaiah is going to be prophesying, and is prophesying to the kings of Israel and Judah, who are still sovereign, free nations then. Now, Daniel, even from his early days, finds himself in exile. And much of his ministry is done when they are no longer a free nation. So the political circumstances of those people in the days of Daniel, they are no longer a free sovereign entity. They are slaves, basically. Okay? They are in exile, serving masters. In fact, the ministry of Daniel is discharged from the royal courts of a foreign king. So even the immediate target of his messaging is not even the people of God per se. He's prophesying more to these pagan kings. Yeah. You see the difference? That's a world of difference. Yeah. It's a world of difference. And so you've got to be able to understand that. I could give another example. An example of Malachi, for example. Yeah, so let's take Malachi. This is now around 435, 430 BC. At this time, Israel is no longer in exile, concerning Judah. They have begun returning to the land. So, in a sense, you can say they are no longer in captivity. But would you really say that they are completely free? No, because the little freedom they have is granted freedom. It's freedom at the pleasure of the ruling empire. Right? Yeah. And so even the rebuilding of Jerusalem is going to happen, but it's not complete. And everything they do, they're going to get permission. I think those circumstances are important. Let me say why that is important. For example, now in the case of Malachi, their social, economic, political situations, free yet not free, meaning they were promised a return after 70 years, which supposedly has happened. And then if you look at the prophets of men like Haggai and Zechariah, there are certain good deeds that were also promised with the return from exile. But are they seeing those things to the full? Actually, no. So we seem to be back in our land. So politically we appear like we are okay. But that great messianic age of prosperity is not there. Hence the question they're asking, is God being faithful to his word? You know those 5 or 7 questions in the book of Malachi? Yeah. The people keep on questioning God because God didn't promise them something. They seem to be enjoying some freedom, but it's not the kind of freedom they would have loved to see. So that informs them the attitudes that they have. Why are they grumbling, complaining against God, and why does God answer them as he does? And the whole point I'm making is, it's not just that we are conscious of the times, we are also aware of the circumstances of the people of God, hali na mazingira ya watu wa Mungu. Je, ni watu huru au wako katika hali ya utumwa, au wako katika hali ya kurejea kutoka kwenye utumwa pasi na kupata uhuru kamili? Matarajio yao walikuwa yapi? Wanayovuna ni yapi? Sio? So hali kama zile zinakusaidia kuelewa angalau mawazo yao. Mbona wanafikiria hivi? Mbona wanalalama hivi? Mbona wanamtukana Mungu hivi? Mbona wanaletea Mungu sadaka ambazo zimelemaa? Because that's the complaint that God brings. You bring lame offerings. The question is, why are these people bringing lame offerings, blind animals? Do they have a reason? They actually think they do have a reason. And the reason is, God, you have promised that you return us from exile, you give us the great messianic age of prosperity. We're not seeing it. So why should we go out of our way to give you our best when you've not given us your best? Now you understand the conversation there. Yeah. And so I think I was preaching somewhere in Lagos sometime last year from Malachi 1. And part of what I think I remember saying was, we are on our path to spiritual decline and degradation, false, dry worship, when we think we have done more for God than God has done for us. And that's Malachi, isn't it? Yeah, that's Malachi. They have returned to the land. They've sort of begun rebuilding the temple. They're restoring its worship. And they're imagining that now the Messianic age will come and there will be milk and honey again. And there's no milk and there's no honey. Why? Because they fail to realize that the promises that were being given are not to be exhausted with the physical Israel. They will be exhausted when the great son of David actually occupies the throne. They're looking to Christ. And that's what Malachi is going to tell them. The message of the covenant is coming. God has not failed. So you see then how the chronology leads us to the socio-economic political circumstances which help us get an understanding of why they're grumbling and why they're being given the answer they're being given. Yeah. So we look at the chronology of time, but we also look at the social political situation around that time. So you want to ask yourself questions like, at this point in time, who are the ruling empire of the world? Now, like in the days of Christ, who are the ruling empire? The Romans. Now that's important, because as we mingle with the New Testament record, it is dominated by Roman rule. So we meet a Roman centurion, don't we? Who are the Roman centurions? Pilate is a Roman governor, right? Yeah. So we've got to be acquainted with these political circumstances. Who are the world empire? Who are the political leaders? So on and so forth. Who is the reigning king in Israel at this point in time? And what kind of king was he? Was he a bad king? Was he a good king? Yeah? So you ask questions like that. Social, political, economic circumstances associated with those times. But most importantly, and the brother has alluded to it, is you are more concerned with the spiritual condition of the people of God, isn't it? Yeah. What is the spiritual condition? And there can only be 2 or 3 to think about. One, sometimes the people of God are in a season of faithfulness to God. Normally, those seasons in the Old Testament are associated with the nature of the king who rules. Yeah. The Old Testament doesn't go into detail in telling us the conduct of the people. It is always the conduct of the king. And we are supposed to assume that the conduct of the king is representative of the conduct of the people. So if a king was evil, the nation is going through a period of general decline. Yeah, so the days of King Ahab, for example. And so you find the worship of Baal and Ashtaroth, etc. Yeah. So you want to ask yourself, are the people of God at this moment in time being faithful, which by and large is what characterizes the much of the period of the United Kingdom, particularly under David? Or are they in rapid decline, which begins with the end of Solomon's reign, going down, and from Solomon it's a downward spiral. Yeah. Now there are sometimes that the people of God are in a state of general backsliding. Yeah. General backsliding. Return to me and I will return to you. So you have things like that. Yeah. There's a general backsliding. And sometimes there is a season of restoration, like in the book of Nehemiah and Ezra. Yeah. So you've got to be aware of what are the spiritual circumstances of the people of God. Now, the reason why that is because then you can be able to interpret the specific passages we're dealing with that come to us around that period in time, in terms of either these people are under the blessings of God, or they are under the judgment of God, or they are under a period of a partial blessing because there is some kind of repentance and partial restoration. That awareness of the spiritual circumstances should be present with you. Does that make sense? Now let me try to apply this to a particular example that I raised earlier of Jeremiah. And particularly Jeremiah 29 and verse 11. So let me ask you, how do people normally interpret that text in Jeremiah 29 and 11? What's the general use of that text that you're aware of? You know the text, don't you? Inasemaje? I know the plans. Plans for prosperity and not. Plans to. And you've had sermons from that text. What kind of sermons are there? Some of hope. What else? Hope. What else? Yes, prosperity. Yeah, prosperity is our portion. Christians should not suffer. It is never God's will for you to suffer. He says, I have good plans. Hallelujah. Plans for good, not for evil. To give you a future and a hope. And those are the words you find. So someone can preach a sermon, a prosperity sermon from that text. I can't understand how they do that. Well, I can because I did at some point. Okay? We're in Jeremiah 29 verse 11. So let's now try to use the information we have given. So, question number one. What is the general chronological timeline of Jeremiah? At what point in time is Jeremiah's ministry to be understood? Let's ask that question. Yep. Yep. Would you say it's a time when Israel is a faithful people of God? Under the blessings of God. Is that what you would say? Okay, so the general situation there, because the ministry of Jeremiah starts, say, around 627 BC to around 587, 586, 85 there. So about 40 years in ministry. Yeah. So during that chronological time, what are the political, the social, political, economic situation of those people? Now, how do we determine that? How do we determine that? You go to Jeremiah 1, isn't it? when did this man minister? And we are given a number of kings. He began ministering during the days of Josiah, isn't it? And then Joachim, and then Zedekiah, and up until the captivity. So what do we know about the reign of Josiah? Now I'm going to ask quite a bit of you here. What do we know about Josiah as a king? Was he a good king or a bad king?
It was good, and then he brought reforms.
Yeah, but by and large, I think we must say he was a good king. He was a reforming king. Yeah. So he was a reforming king. He reigned for about 31 years, I think. So Jeremiah begins to prophesy in his 13th year. So he's going to prophesy for 18 years or 18 years under Josiah. Yeah. So Jeremiah began his ministry, and 13 years of his ministry, basically, 17 years of ministry, 18 years of ministry are under a good king. So there is relative goodwill from God. But let's examine that further, because it's not enough to simply say that Josiah was a good king. Josiah was a good king, yes, but he came after who? Who did Josiah come after? Not before, after.
Joachim.
Who did he come after?
Joachim.
Yes? Who did he come after?
Joachim.
Yes? Yeah. So the story of Josiah is recorded, for example, in 2 Kings 22, isn't it? That's what we find it. So who is the king after him? Before him? Before him? Ammon, isn't it? Is it Ammon?
Yes.
And before Ammon?
Manasseh.
Thank you. Tell me something about Manasseh. Tell me something about Manasseh.
Killed his sons.
What do we know about him?
He burned his sons.
Yeah. Manasseh seems to have taken the idolatry of Judah to a whole new level. A whole new level. He is the one who brought the worship of these foreign gods to the very precincts of the temple. Such that now Manasseh burns children to Molech. His own children, I think, he burned to Molech. Okay, so he was like the worst of the worst. Now let me ask something more. What important announcement did God make during the days of Manasseh, if you remember? There's an announcement God made during the days of Manasseh that is not going to be revoked. Yeah? Is it not during the days of Manasseh that God actually made the determination that no matter what happens, Judah will go to exile? Okay? Because of the gross idolatry of Manasseh, the final decision is made that Judah will go to exile. Notice, I'm not talking about Israel here, because Israel had gone to exile nearly 180 years earlier. Now it's Judah. Now why is that significant? It means that by the time the next kings come over Judah, it will not matter how good they are. Right? The best they can hope to achieve is to suspend for a while the exile, but never to cancel it altogether. Now, isn't that precisely what we are told in the days of Manasseh? That because of Josiah, that because of the great reforms that he did, God held back the exile. But God did not cancel it. Now, what that means is, for the entire period that Jeremiah is preaching, even when the times appear to be good because Josiah is king, already there is a judgment pending, hanging over the heads of the people of God. There is an inescapable judgment. Whatever happens here, however good things look now, you guys are going to exile. So at the very beginning of Jeremiah's ministry, that is the situation. The good king Josiah can only suspend the judgment for a while. Now, would you say that this is a particularly happy moment? I mean, if you are on the table, at the table eating, yeah, unakula ngoma sio? I was watching some I don't know what to call it, documentary what, but the last moments of people on death row, okay? What happens to them before they are going to be hung. Now in America they have a tradition that a day before someone goes to be hanged, they will try to give you the best treatment they can. And so you've been eating chakula gereza for all these years. If they're going to hang you tomorrow, they will not give you an opportunity to choose what food you want to eat. So let me ask you, do you think that this person who is choosing sima kwa kuku anakula kifry? Because you know, it's just the last meal before I die. That is the situation of Judah in the days of Jeremiah. Even when Josiah is king, they may be enjoying some temporary respite, but the decision has been made. Exile is inevitable. Now his ministry starts at that point. And from that point, when Josiah dies and the other kings come, will it get better or worse? It's going to go even worse. Now, much of Jeremiah's ministry happens at a time that the Babylonians have actually surrounded Jerusalem. Babylonians have surrounded Jerusalem. But the people are rebellious, but even in their rebellion, they still think they can claim the promises of God. Now here's what they're saying. There is no way Jerusalem is going to fall, because God will never allow Jerusalem to fall. You can read that in chapter 26, I think in chapter 7 of the book, right? But Jeremiah's whole ministry then is to tell them, look, don't be deceived by these prophets who are telling you that this city will not fall. The city is falling. In fact, Jeremiah's ministry is to urge his countrymen to surrender to the Babylonians. Please surrender quickly. That's not what you want, is it? I mean, the Somalians are coming to attack us, and then you're a prophet and you're telling King Ruto, surrender. Yeah? And you're a prophet. Come on now. Prophets don't do that. Eh? But that's Jeremiah's ministry. To tell a nation under siege to surrender. Yes.
So that's the whole scenario now. We can relate on whatever Daniel said. I think it is in chapter 9. Daniel. His statement said that, I think it is in chapter 9.
Yeah.
He said, through the books, I know that we are in exile for the
Just leave that for a moment. Just leave that for a moment. We want to stay with Jeremiah. Okay? Yeah. So do you see the circumstances there? Politically, they are about to go into exile. Eh? How long is that exile going to be? 70 years. Eh? Yeah. So where do we find it written that these guys are going to exile for 70 years? Chapter 25, isn't it? Yeah. It is in chapter 25 that the people are told, you are going into captivity for 70, not 17, 70 years. Okay? And that 70-year exile is the cup of God's wrath from verse 15 onwards of chapter 25. Yeah. So look at verse 30. Therefore, you shall therefore prophesy against them in these words and say to them, the Lord will roar from on high, and from his holy habitation after his voice, he will roar up mightily against his fold. This fold belongs to God, isn't it? The kundi land, but he will roar not for it. He roars against it. And shout like those who tread grapes against all the inhabitants of the earth. And so on. So God prophesies disaster about that. That says the Lord was, behold, disaster is going forth from nation to nation. Okay? Yeah. So that is the situation. Babylon is threatening Judah. They're banging at the doors of Jerusalem. as we speak. In chapter 27, the judgment is described in terms of the yoke of Nebuchadnezzar, isn't it? Yeah. The yoke of Nebuchadnezzar is coming. And then there's some other false prophets who say otherwise. Now, it is in that particular context that God is going to give something of a ray of hope. Yeah. Now, a letter is written, interestingly enough here, and this is quite amazing. Look at verse 1 of chapter 29. These are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent to the surviving elders of the exiles and to the priests, the prophets, and all the people who Nebuchadnezzar had taken into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. This was after King Jeconiah and the king. Yeah, so at certain point, but let me just mention this. The exile of Judah did not happen at once. It happened in phases. So by the time that the city is about to finally fall, others are already in exile. That's what is going on here. But in that context of writing to those exiles, a message of hope is going to come. So look at verse 10. That says the Lord, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will visit you, and I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. Then verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare, not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Now, the promise of these good plans will come after how many years?
After 20 years.
But for now,
You remain in exile.
thank you. So this is not a message of prosperity now. This is a message of, in spite of the exile, in spite of the problems, in spite of the captivity, in spite of the pain, which you must endure for 70 years, the promise of God has not failed. Right? That's the message. Yeah. So the message is not that Christians cannot suffer. The message is Christians can and will suffer, but in the midst of the sufferings of the people of God, the promise of God stands. Now, we know that this is the right interpretation because we understand, first of all, the general timeline of these words. Around the time 580 something BC. We know the political circumstances of the people. They're about to go into a 70-year-old exile. This is not a most hopeful time. Why are they going to exile? Because of the spiritual condition of rebellion. So what's going on here is judgment. Now, if there's a message you can preach from here, it is not a message of prosperity now. It's a message that we find elsewhere in the scriptures. In wrath, remember mercy. That's the message. Katika hasira kumbuka nini? Huruma. So God, even in his deepest anger, the anger of God unfolding against a people that belong to him, is never without mercy. There's always hope there. But if you're not considering all these circumstances, that is how you come to this hopeless interpretation. Christians cannot suffer. No, these guys are going to suffer for 70 years. Right? Yeah. But the message there is, in spite of this long 70 years of suffering, the promise of God still stands. Now, what enables us to arrive at that correct interpretation of this widely misused passage is because we are conscious of the circumstances and the environment in which this text comes. Alright? So then we are basically saying to us that when you are coming to the interpretation of the scriptures, and here I'm focusing particularly on the Old Testament, the chronology is important, but along with the chronology, acquaint yourself with the social, political, and economic situation of the people and their spiritual circumstances. Are they obedient? Are they rebellious? Are they under judgment? Are they under restoration? And then all the words of the book you're dealing with at that time should be interpreted in the light of that context. Yeah, that's how you do it. That's how you do it. Now let me just mention something in passing as I close because we 18 minutes, almost 20 minutes past time. I've measured on how to apply this general historical context of a text, largely in the Old Testament sense, because it's the more difficult to do. That's why I chose it. Yeah? And I could have chosen Malachi, which I've mentioned. I could have chosen Isaiah. Yeah? But let me just say the following in terms of the New Testament. Even there, you should be able to understand what's going on. Like I've said, the New Testament comes to us within the context of the Greco-Roman culture, isn't it? Yeah. The ruling empire of the day is the Romans. So you've got to be acquainted with some of these Roman practices. Do you know, for example, that crucifixion was a Roman form of punishment? You know that? You do? Yeah. Yeah. And for you to appreciate what happened to Christ when he was crucified, you need to understand the laws of the Romans that had regard to crucifixion. Because crucifixion was a method of judicial punishment under Roman law, but it had certain limitations. For example, you could not sentence a Roman to death by crucifixion. You couldn't. Crucifixion was only possible among the following categories. One, the worst offenders, murderers, mutineers. But even these murderers and mutineers should not be Romans. They are those who are non-Romans, mostly slaves. Those who've read, for example, in history, some people think it's myth, but I think it's grounded in some facts. The Great Spartacan Rebellion. Some of you have read about it. The man called Spartacus lived some time there. And when his rebellion was crushed by the Romans, what happened to his followers? They were crucified. And that's how they did it. So you couldn't crucify a Roman. Why? Because crucifixion was not only considered painful, it was considered degrading, dehumanizing. And under Roman law, you could not dehumanize a Roman. Okay? What that tells you is the treatment that Christ was given by being crucified, understood under that context of Roman law, means he received the worst possible treatment. The most painful death over the longest period of time under the most humiliating circumstances. Now, crucifixion brought all those three together. Very painful. Imagine you are hanging with your hands nailed to the cross and your feet. And your muscles are now tired. And you try to pull yourself up at least to capture some breath. And it's the nails that are moving now. You feel better, don't you? No, you don't. So the pain. And then it is pain that doesn't kill you quickly. It kills you over a long period of time. And it is publicly meted out to humiliate you. Often you will be naked. So you see, people can talk about Kristo alisulubiwa and they can do that laughing. But they don't understand, under the Greco-Roman context of the day, what that meant. Yeah. So awareness of the Roman way of doing things would help you to interpret certain texts of the New Testament. I mean, some groups of people who existed there. You're going to be familiar with people like, who are the Pharisees? Yeah, who are they? Who are the Sadducees? Who are the Zealots? Yeah? Yeah, because these were categories of people who existed then. Who are the Samaritans? That will help you understand Christ's interactions with them. So those general, broad circumstances, even in the New Testament, would help you make sense of some of this. You need to be acquainted, for example, with the Greco-philosophical religious influence But even though the Romans were the ruling empire, but the culture was dominated by the Greeks, who ruled before the Romans. Yeah. So you've got to be familiar, for example, with the Greek religious mystery cults of those days. So when you're reading, for example, the book of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and John is wrestling with these people who say Christ has not come in the flesh. What is informing that? There are certain Greek Gnostic ideas which have infiltrated the Christian church and are influencing how they look at Christ. If you don't know that, you are lost in those texts. See what I'm saying? Yeah. So an understanding of those general historical, geographical, social, political circumstances of Old Testament, New Testament would help you very much to come to grips with the text that you are dealing with. So I don't know that I can at least now say more than that, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. Now what this means is you've got to have a wider knowledge of your Bible than you normally do. Yeah. We are socialized to look at the Bible in terms of verses. We don't read the Bible as a whole from cover to cover, and then trying to figure out at what stage of history do I find myself here. Now you need to develop that way of reading the Bible. Because if you don't, this larger general historical context will be lost on you. And you will twist the scriptures. Okay? Yeah. So tomorrow morning when we come, God willing, we will now, still with regards to the historical principle, we will now come to what we call the immediate context, or the specific background. So we look at the general background, we look at the book, what time frame, socioeconomic circumstances, and so on, spiritual conditions. You familiarize yourself with those, and then there is a specific background of the text itself. And 4 things we're going to look at, and I just mentioned them to you, and you can think about them as we prepare for tomorrow. So you ask yourself a question like, who is the writer of this book? Yeah, you've got to know who the writer is, and I'll tell you why tomorrow. Who is he writing to? Who is he writing to? And then, what is the occasion of the writing? That means, why is he writing? Okay? Why is he writing? Now, normally to arrive at the occasion of the writing, you've got to answer the 4th question. What are the circumstances, immediate circumstances, of both the writer and the audience? Yeah. It is these two that will bring you to the occasion of the book. So those are the 4 things I want us to look at tomorrow morning. How important is knowledge of the writer to our interpretation? How important is knowledge of the audience to our interpretation? And then the reason for the writing, and how you arrive at the reason for the writing, and then how to determine the situation of both the writer and the audience. So in the morning, the first hour, we will deal with those 4 things. And then, of course, after we've done that, we will take text of scriptures and apply this. Just like we try to apply the general background to the text of Jeremiah. Yeah? Maybe tomorrow we should do 1 or 2 more, just so that you are more familiar with this. We look also at how to apply the specific background of the text. And then give a few examples. Okay? Yeah. So let's end there, at least for now.